great day for the beach, and what a beautiful beach it is. You know, the South Shore is known for its many attractive qualities. And in order to conserve that which is most important and change that which needs to be changed, we elect state representatives. Joan Meschino of the Third Plymouth District oversees the area known as Hingham, Hull, Cohasset, and North Scituate. With her many years of experience, she's more than up for the challenge. Hello, I'm Joe Collymore, and welcome to our next episode of Close-Ups. With me today is our State Representative Joan Meschino. She represents the Third Plymouth District, which encompasses the towns of Hingham, Hull, Cohasset, and North Scituate. Welcome, Representative Meschino.
Thank you so much, and it's Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Before we get into the discussion of the issues that are most important and passionate to you, I want to share with our listeners a little bit of your background and your experience. You're a lawyer, a former selectman with the Hull Board of Selectmen. You served on regional and statewide commissions. And as I understand it, you were named among the top women in law in Massachusetts in the year 2014.
Yes.
Am I missing anything else in that regard?
I actually haven't practiced law in quite a while. So I've been certainly licensed to practice for over 20 years. But for the past 9 years before I was elected, I was actually a nonprofit CEO running a public interest law center, Massachusetts Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. And they took a little bit of a different look at how to deliver legal aid by taking a step back from direct representation and really thinking about the research, the policy development, but focusing on systemic solutions for social justice issues. So I was the director there for 9 years and really built the center up and loved every part of it. And I like to think that my selectmen, my public service, led me to Appleseed, and then it was my work at Appleseed that led me to look for a broader platform and to run for state representative.
And as state representative, you are now into, shall we say, the midpoint of your 2-year term?
16 months in.
16 months in, and I know that we had previously talked about the terms of endearment at the State House in terms of freshman legislators.
They do like to refer to our class as their freshmen.
In the 16 months in, what has been your overall impression of our state legislator, and what experiences have been aha moments, if you will?
So I feel that my prior civic work with the communities really allowed me to hit the ground running. You referred to a few of the boards and commissions and statewide commissions. I was also on the executive board of our Regional Planning Association. And what it did was it really gave me the ability, the perspective, it gave me a lot of relationships, and the experience I needed to walk into the State House and really hit the ground running. And I was delighted to discover that the State House is a place where you can really find your own path and really chase your own advocacy missions and the things that are important for the district.
You serve on several committees.
Yes. So telecom, utility, and energy.
Yes.
Transportation, community development and small business. And then I also serve on a House committee for post-audit and oversight.
Let's talk a little bit more about transportation for starters. We live in a beautiful area here, and particularly during this time of the year when summer is upon us, the people, the visitors as well as the residents, they all flock to the beaches, to the wonderful marinas and waterways. And yet we have, as you well know, several areas of challenges, if you will, in terms of reliable transportation, whether it's by car or by rail or by water.
And bus.
And bus, yes. So share with us your perspective on what you see as the challenges facing our district, our community, as it relates to the various modes of transportation in terms of growth and sustainability?
So I think one of the biggest challenges right now that we have is congestion. Getting around our district can be quite a challenge, especially at certain points of the day. And for communities like Cohasset and Hull, and even to some extent North Scituate, just even getting access through, say, a community like Norwell or Hingham or Weymouth can be a challenge. And so how you have that flow. But commuting is a bear. Anyone who's driven through the Southeast Expressway or through the Braintree Split knows that. So what becomes really important to us is how do you get cars off the road? And the way you do that is reliable public transit. And I emphasize reliable because we're trying to get to work. You have to be there by a certain time. You have to know that you're going to get there. And you can't wonder, is the red line going to work today, or am I going to be stuck on a track somewhere? So we're fortunate in that we do have a robust ferry service. The only thing that's really slowed it up in the past few winters has been deep cold and ice. Which I think everyone understands there's not a whole lot we can do about Mother Nature. But I think that is an example of when you strike the balance of the right amount of capacity, the right types of timing on the runs themselves, it will just grow and flourish. And I think, in fact, you've seen the economic development that flows from that.
Within your district, the town of Hull is a peninsula community.
Yes.
You know, it's sort of in many respects one way in, one way out, although you can come in the backside through Cohasset versus the front side through Hingham.
There really are only two roads in.
Yes. We are now in the midst of, shall we call it, an experiment, the road diet.
Oh, yes. We've heard a lot about that.
Yes, and I'd love to get your perspective on what's the driver behind that, what brought that forth, what might be some of the impact, not only in Hingham, but also in Hull, and connecting the dots, if you will, from transportation to economic development, because part of the economic driver for Hull is the summer and those who are day trippers to the lovely beach on Nantasket Beach, for example.
500,000 people will visit Nantasket in the year. Mm-hmm.
And they'll have to encounter, presumably, that the diet, which I understand is going to be in existence at least through the end of July.
This arises as a public safety question, actually, that the town of Hingham, Hingham Public Safety, brought forward. And for those of us who've lived in the district for a long time, you know, we've seen the evolution of that stretch of roadway when they fixed Muzzie's Corner, when Broad Cove went down to one lane, different parcels and different businesses, and sort of the middle stretch were purchased by the town of Hingham. For my part, as I listened to the dialogue of the local elected officials with MassDOT and with each other. For those who don't realize, the town of Hingham and the town of Hull had extensive discussions around the best way to do this, involving both the police and fire, so not just public safety, but also emergency management response. And as we watched the dialogue evolve, the takeaway for me anyway was that Hingham Public Safety was raising an important public safety question, and we could argue and debate about what we thought we know, or we could inconvenience ourselves for a brief period of time, do a study, and actually find out the answers to some of those basic questions that we can then use as a foundation for good policy discussions.
Do you think that the state will have some role in the end result of what this might be, or will it still reside strictly between Hingham and the town of Hull? What if the two communities can't agree?
Oh, there's a good relationship between our town managers meet monthly, our public safety officials meet monthly, they talk regularly. These are entities that coordinate around a variety of topics, not the least of which is our emergency 911 is a shared system. So I promise you, it will be a good dialogue. We are well managed. We have top-notch public safety officials. We have really solid, good boards of selectmen. So it will be, it might be a robust and vibrant discussion, but I promise you, it will be a good discussion, and I promise you, we will discuss the results, and they will come to a smart and sensible resolution. Of that, I have no doubt.
Right. I'd like to talk a little bit more about community development and small business, because particularly, again, here in our area, we have quite a diverse set of economic activity, if you will. A fair amount of tourism, a fair amount of light industry and retail shops, particularly when you compare and contrast the likes of North Scituate, Cohasset, Hingham, and Hull. Tell me what your priorities are as it relates to those key areas.
Well, quite frankly, one of the best things I can be doing is supporting some of the zoning reform that is now being debated in the House of Representatives. We're hopeful that a zoning reform bill will come out, and it's not the exciting, sexy topic. It's really just the tools, the basics that you give to your communities to help them plan. And each community has to decide for itself what they want their community to look like, what the quality of life is. And zoning is just the way you tell either residences or businesses or developers what you expect. I think the other piece of it is to really help the communities, the local governments. There are a lot of housing programs out there, CDCs, earn tax credits, and really make some of these programs available that can really help incentivize some of the programming and the development that you want. But at the end of the day, it starts with the community. All I can really do is look to see what you're doing by way of planning, look to see what you're doing, and help provide the tools and incentives like the tax credits and different things like that to really avail yourself of what's out there and to attract that kind of economic development that the communities desire.
When we talk about zoning reform, and just if we could go just a little bit deeper on this, there's, depending upon which community, I know that Hingham recently in its town meeting had an amendment to its zoning to allow for
accessory dwelling units.
Yes, accessory dwelling units. And I know that in the community of Hull there has been lots of debate and conversation about whether or not to allow for Airbnb type zoning given the seasonal nature of our visitors there. So what do you see as some of the key components of zoning reform, or at least that which should be discussed at the legislative level?
So I think Hingham was very forward-thinking in tackling the accessory dwelling units. It can be a very controversial piece, and I think sometimes communities are afraid to tackle it because it will disrupt the status quo. But everybody deserves to have housing, and they deserve to have proper housing. And so, when you start to tackle some of these things, what it really means is, are you bringing things into compliance with your bylaws, and to make sure everything's up to code and as safe as it can be. I think people sometimes think you're trying to disrupt things, and it's not. I don't think that's actually the case. I think they're really trying to make sure that planning and growth go forward in sensible, smart ways as we share the precious resources we have.
Speaking of which, looking at energy and the environment,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Especially looking at it from an environmental standpoint, for starters. We've had a fair amount of coastal damage, as you know, all up and down from Brant Rock and Marshfield straight all the way up to even including parts of Squantum, for example. What do you see as what we should be focused on in terms of environmental controls, sustainability, and finding where's that harmonious place that says, well, we're not extending ourselves beyond the natural boundary of the coastline and setting ourselves up for more storm damage, more homes being flooded out because they're in low-lying areas, as an example. Can you expand a little bit on that?
The infrastructure is all there. All you have to do is drive the coastline of our district, and we have roadways right here in Hingham in the harbor, right up to the edge of the coastline. We have seawalls, from Nantasket right down to through Situate. So for better or for worse, we have actually built that infrastructure already, and we have homes, we have businesses, we have critical infrastructure there. And at this point in the game, I don't think that retreat is realistically an option. And we have to protect it. There's a seawall at the furthest point of Hull, right at Allerton, that has failed. And people might question, well, why should we bother to restore it? Because that's where the water main and the gas main, come through. It's not just about a house or two that sits there. It's about everything that's behind it. And it's about the nature and the quality of life in our community. It's about public safety in homes, and it's about our businesses.
Joan, I'd like to talk a little bit more about our support services in our community, especially for our veterans. As I understand it, the State House just passed a bill for veterans. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. The veterans are a top priority in the State House, and I know locally as well. And this bill, in advance of Memorial Day, was just meant to increase some services, things like doubling the death benefit for burials from $2,000 to $4,000. Some basic things that we can do to honor the men and women who have served our communities and who we should be bringing forward and supporting every step of the way.
Staying on that topic for just a moment, I understand that there are some groups in our community, in our area, who are reaching out to some of the veterans and encouraging them for Hep C testing, for example.
Yes.
And what little knowledge I have, the treatment for Hep C in the past was a long, drawn out, perhaps as long as a year of doses, and quite expensive. And now fast forward with the new technologies and breakthroughs in medicine, I believe it's now a 90-day treatment to cure. And perhaps, are there additional financial aid and supports and grants and the like available to some of these veterans who may or may not qualify?
So I would encourage all veterans to step forward, introduce themselves, even if they're not signing up for actual benefits, but to connect with the VA and with their local service agents. We have wonderful veteran service agents in our district, and they can help connect an individual veteran with a myriad of services. And what they're just going to do is test. They're going to connect with you with services, and they're going to test. And people shouldn't be afraid to step forward. It's better to know for your own public health and safety. And right now, you actually will be eligible for coverage through the VA. So it's a pretty important thing to do, and it's just one example of the kinds of services that our veterans agencies can put forward, and our veterans agents can connect you with.
Staying on the topic of support services, I want to touch base on the libraries. I mean, we've got some great libraries in our area here. Tell me more about your focus as it relates to building out and sustaining and supporting our libraries for our communities.
Well, it's lifelong learning, right? We all go to school and then we graduate, and this is the place where we can get our start, because they have some wonderful early education programs for young children, and then support all of the learning that we do K through 12. And then it's a place for those of us who are adults and seniors to go back and to continue lifelong learning. It is the quintessential community center, the intersection of reading and music and art, books on tape, and it's really media. So they've embraced a variety of media, something for everybody. And it is the place where you can access information, and this, in my opinion, is the cornerstone of your community. If you want to take the pulse of your community, take a look at your libraries.
I want to stay on this point of our support services, and let's talk a little bit about it's not even the sleeping elephant in the room anymore. We're talking about the opioid crisis, and we know that there are lots of efforts taking place. I'd like to get your sense on what are some of the promising developments that you see unfolding here in the state, and more specifically how they might benefit those in our community who are dealing with dependency on whether they are prescriptions or other substances that have brought about addictive personalities.
There's actually a tremendous amount going on in this area recently. For reasons I don't fully understand, our communities, the South Shore, got hit really hard with the opiate addiction issues. And, you know, I have to say, it was the single thing, the item that everywhere I went on the campaign trail, every single event, every person mentioned that to me. So it's really an issue that resonates very strongly within our district. The legislature, before I was elected, the legislature took some really terrific steps. First of all, we talk about it, and that just goes so far to removing some of the stigmatization. I think that's probably the biggest thing we need to continue to focus on, is to just try to remove the stigmatization so that people will actually step forward and avail themselves of the services that are here and the coverage that we do have thus far. For my part, I think that the prevention piece is probably the single most important place for us to start to focus. You know, for a dollar spent, you know, how many dollars are you going to save on the back end of treatment? For, you know, a child who doesn't first take that, you know, smoke a cigarette or try drugs, that's a life that's saved. So for my part, that's the piece where we should be focusing. The legislature just signed a bill. One of the new things has been vaping. Hingham PTO put on I guess it's just an educational, informational for parents, and it was really quite shocking to me to learn about the vaping. And the legislature heard that across the state. We heard that hue and cry, and they just put out a new bill that would ban sale of tobacco and vaping materials and nicotine to any young person under the age of 21. And I didn't realize this, but what it does is it puts it firmly within the sort of tobacco rules, which we all know pretty well. Our communities and our licensing boards all deal with this very well. But I didn't realize that only half of our communities in Massachusetts had raised the age to 21. So now it's across the board, it's 21, just to try to get it out of the hands of young kids, because they don't even realize that it's nicotine, they don't realize that it's addictive, and they don't understand necessarily that that's what they're smoking. And the vaping actually has other health consequences that people are just starting to understand that don't even have anything to do with the nicotine piece, that are harmful in and of themselves. So it's probably the single most important thing we've done so far this year.
That's a very key point, because it suggests that our legislators, our policymakers, are really affecting cultural change. In the two examples that you've given, culturally we would dismiss tobacco, for example. Well, it's just tobacco. We know its health risks, but and
adults, right? Yes. We're all adults, so we can make choices for ourselves. Mm-hmm. I think that's quite the case for young people. I think there's a lot of socialization around these things, and young people modeling adult behavior. So I think that's why it's important to really get it from 18 up to 21, because when you think about the connectivity of young people, you really want to keep it out of those high schools.
Do myself in media and you in public office, do we have an obligation as the face to the public of influencing discussions on difficult topics and positively influencing culture?
Oh, interesting question. That's actually a very interesting question. I think it's an incredibly timely question.
Okay.
going back to our discussion on the libraries, you know, a lot of people say, I can't believe anything anymore, or I saw this on Facebook or Twitter, or even, quite frankly, some of the news outlets are so quick to react to things. And I can see where people feel barraged and feel uncertain about how to assess, you know, what they're hearing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that the media has an opportunity to speak truth to power and to illuminate issues, but illuminate them in a way that people can think about them and assess for themselves. And I think that's where I see the overreaching is everyone's quick to tell you what you should think. People are smart, and I think that we owe them a little bit more respect than to tell them what they should think. I think we owe them good debates in public, in the public forum. And you see that in town meeting. I mean, that is the purest form of democratic town government we have. I am a huge fan. I always go to my town meeting. And I think that is where you see it on the very most local level.
I do have some very particular thoughts on that. And let me back up by sharing from an educational perspective. It starts in the schools. That is to say, back during my era, we did have a component in our social studies curriculum that dealt with civics.
Yes.
That dealt with understanding the structure of local government, that dealt with an understanding of, shall we call it, healthy discourse.
Yes.
To be able to debate. And unfortunately, as we have perhaps the benefit of the internet with various forms of communication through homegrown media to as far-reaching as foreign governments who are invading our social networks in an attempt to frame and shape our thoughts. We've got to go back to our roots. We've got to take it to our next generation of American citizens to teach them how to delineate fact from fiction.
And how to articulate.
And how to articulate that. To be able to question the right way without it necessarily turning into a personal attack.
Well, and I think also that a question is not a criticism. It's an exploration, and it's an understanding of the rationale. Right. And maybe because I'm a lawyer and that's what you're trained to do, I don't always see that questioning as an affront. I see it as part of the natural process to getting to the underlying values and the underlying ideas, really, behind assertion. I think the other piece, too, is I see young people coming forward and they have amazing ideas. They're so smart, they're so well informed, and they're very thoughtful, but I don't always see that connectivity with action at the local level. And I think that that's really a critical component. And I've seen that start to come back into the schools through service requirements. And sometimes we get students come and ask us, I have to do 40 hours of public service. And I think those kinds of community service-based projects, I think those are the other ways to show that if I take action at the local level, I can have an impact, and that can change the world. It changes our small community, it improves it, and the investment locally can change the world at the larger level as well.
And that concludes our episode of Close-Ups with State Representative Joan Meschino. Thank you very much, Joan.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.